Hello guys, Zuku Midoyagi here. I just like to go by Zuku though, anyway. So I'm recording this audio on September 14th. I'm a few days late on this, but to honor the tragedy that obviously happened a little over 22 years ago. I You guys know how close I am to it. I didn't lose anyone in the attacks, thankfully, but I don't know why. I've just had some sort of connection with New York. It's why My Hero America is hosted in New York, and yeah, um, basically, I'm just for some reason very close to the attacks. I don't know why, because no one I knew was even involved in the attacks in any way, shape, or form. But I just have a sense of urge to cover the attacks whenever I can. You can ask my friends. I end up talking about the World Trade Center specifically a little too much. Anyway, um, so to honor this, I want to um, just sort of go back and talk about the World Trade Center, I guess, because that's my autism go burr, and I want to talk about skyscrapers because former architect major, yeah. This video might be kind of boring for some of you, if that is, and this I completely understand, guys. I get that architecture isn't everyone's thing, but I'm gonna talk about it. But today's video is a history of the World Trade Center, in the My Hero America universe, and I know I wrote a story on Wattpad about this a little bit, but it's slightly changed since then. Um, Yeah, so if you do enjoy listening to history, think of it like a history audiobook with a bunch of pictures put on screen. So yeah, this is a video that if you like want to put in the background just while you're working on something, that this video is for you then. So now that the long banter is out of the way after 2.5 minutes, Jesus Christ, we're gonna get right into the video. The history of the World Trade Center goes back to 1964, in which the site that the World Trade Center would later go on at this point in time was known as Radio Row. Radio Row was as in the name, had music shops and as well as other shops in just along this street near the shoreline at the time, shoreline of Manhattan. The area was known for its hospitality towards small businesses, ironic for what the World Trade Center would later become. Now, in 1965, the Port Authority for New York and New Jersey both needed a place to sort of headquarter themselves, needed a building, a complex as well. They basically commissioned the World Trade Center in a way. And in 1966, Minoru Yamasaki, and at the time somewhat iconic architect, designed the two iconic twin towers that we know today. They were made out of steel, mostly with a little bit of concrete in the core in the middle. I say a little bit, but despite that, there was still enough concrete in each tower to pave a path from New York City to Washington, D.C. That would be the same width as a sidewalk. As such, though, these buildings were more steel support based than concrete support based, which would later actually be the result of their initial downfall in the real world, for lack of a better term. But we'll get to why that's different in the My Hero America verse in a little bit. Now, construction began in late 1966. They started tearing down the much smaller buildings at Radio Row, much to the disapproval of the people who worked and lived in that area. But despite that, demolition and later construction went on anyway. But during this demolition, the Hudson River was built into to allow for more room for the Trade Center site, which at the time would just be a short 30 feet from the new coastline until the 80s when the World Financial Center would be built. But as construction continued, they built a wall to keep the Hudson River out and properly terraformed the land to allow for the towers to stand. Concrete core and steel went up. They just kept going up and up and up. And eventually, by 1970, you could tell that the two towers were there, even if they weren't quite completed yet. In December of 1970, the North Tower would be topped out, followed by the South Tower being topped out in late 1971. In 1972, April 4th to be exact, the World Trade Center was opened to the public. The two twin towers, although not technically complete, were complete enough that people could work and reside in them. There were a few things on the top floors that needed some to be wrapped up in construction, and other buildings were still in the works, such as Building 7, which would not be completed until 1987. But by the end of the 70s, all the World Trade Center buildings, except for Building 7, would be completed. The Twin Towers rose to an astonishing height of 2,100 feet, so 2,112 feet for the North Tower, 2,102 feet for the South Tower to the roof. These ginormous towers were hated at first, despite being a true record breaker, the first building in the My Hero America version of Earth, and technically, if that were the case, it would be our world as well, to cross 2,000 feet. For those wondering, that is a roughly 700 meter tall building. The Twin Towers were ginormous, but despite this record setter, this record-setting set of towers that would put America on the world stage as the true beacon of democracy, because that's what they technically were. Despite the fact that they were hated, they were a beacon of democracy, and they were just a gargantuanly sized set of towers that would define the entire New York skyline. And they were also the center. They were basically the financial capital of the world, these two towers, because there was enough room in each tower to accompany hundreds of companies, hundreds of corporations, and so on and so forth. There was a mall underneath it all. The World Trade Center was set up to be the perfect place for finance and trade, hence the name, obviously. As of 1979, they were still somewhat hated. One reporter, and this is true in our world as well, one reporter remarked that they were the boxes the Empire State Building and Chrysler Building had arrived in, and they just put them up as towers. In 1979, the North Tower was given a radio mast, tower, and or spire on its roof to allow for telecommunications. Many telecommunications companies were worried that the towers would block the signal for their radios and TVs, etc. So what they did was, as a compromise, they were like, all right, then we'll just put a giant fucking TV mast up there. And they did. This TV mast, or spire, because it was more than just a radio tower, there was some more to it, a little bit more to it. But this spire, as it's called, and is still called today, was built to be roughly 550 feet tall, bringing the One World Trade Center's height to 2,655 feet, making it, well, it was already the tallest building in the world, but it reset its record for the tallest building in the world after the Sears Tower in Chicago tried to challenge that claim with its radio masts on top of its buildings, making it taller. However, no one would listen to them. Not seriously, anyway. There was some consideration, but then once this spire went up, they were just like, all right, World Trade Center is the tallest building. Sorry, Chicago. But in 1979, this would spruce up the design, which was a slight factor in the people's opinion starting to change on the Twin Towers, and was also just a useful item, being a cell phone tower. Well, in the future, becoming a cell phone tower for much of the country, as cell phones weren't really common in the late 70s. In 1987, the 725-foot tall World Trade Center 7 would be completed, just across the street from the rest of the complex, with there being bridge-like walking areas that would connect it to the rest of the Trade Center site. What many people don't know about the World Trade Center is that there was a block, almost, that it was on top of, a raised block of, well, obviously concrete that would above the ground, roughly 30 feet, that put it above street level, meaning it was almost impossible for someone to drive up right next to the World Trade Center, so there's added security there. But, so these land bridges would connect World Trade Center 7 to the rest of that block, allowing for more accessibility. In 1993, in February, a member of Al-Qaeda, a few members of Al-Qaeda, took a truck, filled it with explosives, and plopped it right underneath the South Tower of the World Trade Center and set it off. How they did this, they put it in the parking garage underneath. And they just left it there. It went off, and they were hoping they would knock Tower 2 right into Tower 1. However, they failed, because the towers were built different, quite literally. In this case, the multiple steel columns meant that the tower was weakened, but wouldn't have fallen over like it would have been if it was just built out of pure concrete. If it were one unanimous thing, like it would have been for a concrete thing, for like a concrete structure, then odds are it would have been slightly more likely to have collapsed. But since it was steel, that means there were tons more columns than just the ones that were damaged, meaning that the tower stayed up and didn't fall right into the other tower, thus preventing a tragedy for now. After this tragedy, in March of 1993, the owners of the World Trade Center complex would install higher security for the parking garage and on ground level, allowing for a much safer World Trade Center. In the late 1990s, if you don't know, in My Hero America, in the late 1990s, All Might began his training for One for All, etc. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is Nana Shimura, All Might's master, as a part of his training regiment, would have All Might run up and down the stairs of the North Tower of the World Trade Center twice a day to help him build muscle. Gran Torino, taking over for Nana Shimura after her unfortunate death in June of 1996, would then go ahead and continue this training regimen, but doubling it, because Gran Torino is a cruel motherfucker. But anyway, so that was All Might's main training method to help build up his bulk, was running up and down the stairs of the World Trade Center several times a day. It had to be quite painful, considering the towers were 160 stories in the My Hero America verse. Now we are going to slightly follow All Might's story here, as it becomes important for the World Trade Center at later dates. But in 1998, in late June of 1998, All Might would graduate from UA High School in Queens, New York, and would, as a result, following Gran Torino's advice, would leave and fly and operate mainly in San Francisco, but also would occasionally work in Las Vegas and Los Angeles as well. But he would mainly operate in San Francisco for 3 years, until September 9th, 2001, when All Might felt his training was complete and thus booked the next flight home to New York. The next flight would take off early on September 10th. So All Might would hitch this flight home and would land in New York around 1:30 p.m. September 10th of 2001. He landed at JFK International Airport and would immediately set up his apartment in 70 Pine Street, also known as the AIA building, which is, if you don't know, is a residential tower in southern Manhattan, just 4 blocks from the World Trade Center. September 11th, 2001 is a day that, in our world and their world, shall live in infamy forever. There is no underestimating what happened that day, and I'm not trying to do a funny ha-ha or anything about the tragedy. As someone who is close to it, and as someone who, as a testimony from my friends, you could even ask my friends if they would be willing to respond. I despise 9/11 jokes. I don't like them being said around me, and my friends understand that, and they rarely bring them up around me. So I'm saying this because I want to make it clear. I am not trying to make goofy remarks or anything about this tragedy. That was my disclaimer, and I'm going to continue on from here very sorrowfully. September 11th, 2001. All Might woke up a little after 7 a.m. and got himself ready and went to Battery Park. If you don't know, Battery Park is a park in Manhattan that is like the southernmost tip of Manhattan. It's where many pictures of the Statue of Liberty that are not from the actual island for the Statue of Liberty, Liberty Island, are taken from. It's often known for its great view of the Statue of Liberty. All Might would arrive in Battery Park and be waiting there because September 11th was the day he was supposed to finally meet up with his girlfriend, Inko Shimura. He was supposed to meet up with her again as a surprise because he's been gone for 3 years, and the best they were able to do was to talk on the phone, and it was really difficult for both of them. But they did it, and they met up again, and it was around 8 a.m. when they first met up with each other. Finally. They both cried, they both hugged, and it was a very enjoyable moment. All Might, being very cheerful, would be like, "Hey, let's head to my apartment. I just got my apartment. It's gonna be really cool. You'll be staying here from now on instead of staying with Gran Torino." The whole idea. All Might, in his weak form to prevent recognition, would then walk northward with Inko and Gran Torino along Greenwich Street, the eastern street parallel to the World Trade Center. They would be walking north, and they would arrive right at the turn that they needed to make to go to All Might's apartment, which was the corner of Liberty and Greenwich. They would be getting ready to cross the intersection when the clock would tick to 8:46 in the morning. They would be in the middle of crossing the street when they would turn at the sound of a loud jet engine. They turned and looked, All Might turning the quickest due to his hero experience teaching him to, would be the only one to actually see what had just happened of the three. He saw a Boeing 767 jetliner fly straight into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. 9/11 had begun. All Might was shocked by what he had just witnessed, but he also knew he had to step in as a hero, after all, and as the future symbol of peace of the United States and the world, he had to step in. So All Might would risk blowing his cover, immediately would buff up, tear off his clothes to reveal his hero suit, obviously, because he would do the Superman trope. He would tear off his clothes to reveal his hero suit and would immediately jump into action. He would land at the center of the World Trade Center site to get a better look at what was going on, analyzing, making sure he doesn't mess anything up, trying to help. All Might would stare up at the tower in shock for a minute. How could this freak accident How could this be an accident? I mean, it had to be. No one would willingly do this, right? Those were the thoughts running through his head. But being a hero, he would jump up and jump into the North Tower, right into the hole that the plane had made. He would grab everyone he could find, saving nearly 2,000 lives in the North Tower alone, and would bring them all down to safety at the plaza at the base of the World Trade Center, where they would be tended to medically if need be, as well as escorted to safety by police. However, as All Might came down from the North Tower, delivering all for the last time, after getting all the people up in the North Tower, he would fall to his knees and break down. Not full-on crying, but pretty damn close. He would express his emotions to Inko and Gran Torino, who were on the scene. Inko being a nurse, well, almost a nurse, and more so a nurse in training, and Gran Torino being a hero. They would also feel forced to step in, and they did. But when All Might gets to the ground and they see him kneeling, covering his eyes, they immediately rush to his aid and ask him, "What happened up there? What was that? What is it like up there?" And All Might, with tears in his eyes, would go and explain. It's the definition of what we'd see as hell. There's all these body parts, fire, smoke, melted steel made to look like lava. It was hell. That was all he could say. It was hell. A burning inferno, literally how hell is described to many people, how many people think of hell. But All Might would have to gain his composure. The people needed to be calmed. And there were still a few people possibly trapped below the fire in the North Tower that he would also have to go in and make sure we're okay. So he stood back up, and in an iconic picture taken by a police officer who just so happened to have a camera on him, an iconic picture would be taken right there and then. Inko and Gran Torino are looking up at him, while All Might stands up in his buff form, looks up at the towers with tears clearly being shed from his eyes. But he would stand in a position that said he wasn't wavering. He was still going to fight through this burden of what he had seen. All Might then went back up into the tower and would save dozens more lives, if not hundreds. Many people were able to get out of the tower on their own, especially the ones below the crash site. However, what no one had expected was at 9:02 a.m., just a few seconds before 9:03 a.m., All Might would be rushing, after the tower was cleared, would be rushing to everyone saying, "It's all right, everyone. There is no need to panic. This was just a freak accident. I've gotten everyone out." And then would be cut off by a loud explosion after a jet engine. He would turn around to see a fireball wrapped around the South Tower. What the? He couldn't believe his eyes. Holy shit. America just got attacked, were his only thoughts. All Might would immediately rush into action once again, trying to get as many people out as he can, saving as many lives as possible, having to go through that hell he had described earlier. But even he knew he wasn't suffering at the worst. The people suffering at the worst were the people in the tower at the impact site. The people who, for at least a few short seconds, had to die in that hell. All Might had gotten everyone out of the tower by 9 8:18 a.m. In just under 15 minutes, just over 15 minutes of work, he had gotten everyone out of both towers. And everyone out of the surrounding buildings as well, although the police mostly handled the smaller building evacuation since they weren't directly damaged yet. However, they knew that there was another task at hand. The towers were on fire, regardless, and something had to be done to stop that fire. There were firemen, brave heroes willing to risk their lives to get into the towers and climb up. And All Might to this day still says that they were the real heroes, even above him. Yes, he had gone up there and saved the lives with his powers. But the real people were the people who were nearly powerless. Even if they had a quirk, it wasn't as useful necessarily. Who still were ready to trek up that giant tower that was nearly half a mile tall. And were ready to throw their lives away to put out that fire to prevent more damage. These heroes continued up the tower, but it was clear that they were fighting a losing battle. As analysts, architects, experts, what have you, could already tell. This was an issue. The towers were not going to be up forever, and might not survive long enough for the firefighters to get where they needed to get. So All Might had to think, how could I put out this fire? I mean, I could carry just buckets of water up there, but wait, it's a jet fuel fire. Water won't be enough. So he kept thinking, and thinking and thinking, spending a few minutes that he didn't feel he had. Thinking, how can I stop this? How can I fix this? Then he looked at the fire trucks nearby and was like, oh, well, I guess that does it. So the answer was right in front of him the whole time. So All Might walked up to ladder 118 of the fire department of New York City. The main crew of this truck, ladder 118, All Might saw this fire truck and immediately looked for someone to operate it. He found some extra firefighters from the nearby fire department of Stamford, Connecticut, which, if you remember, every fire department in New York was making their way to New York to try and assist, including Stamford's. Stamford, Connecticut fire department operatives had arrived on the scene, but their fire truck was smaller, as they were the first of their department to arrive. And the smaller truck meant it was also faster and able to make turns quicker, etc. So All Might walks up to this group of firefighters who had just arrived on the scene but had not gotten into the buildings yet. And he said, "Do you guys know how to operate this remote hose on this fire truck?" And they said, "Yes, we do, because we have one up in Stamford." And All Might said, "Good, get in." They got into the fire truck listening to All Might. I mean, he was a hero after all. He seemed to know what he was doing. So All Might would then lift up this entire several-ton fire truck filled to the brim with water and other materials for putting out fires. Obviously, they use foam for jet engine fires, and they had foam on the ready for these fire trucks. And then All Might hoisted them up, and while carrying the fire truck, jumped all the way up to the North Tower's impact site. It was now 9:27 a.m. All Might put down the fire truck to make sure it wasn't stuck in anything, and made sure that the hose was in the right spot and the truck was in the right spots for it to be able to get everything it can. So then All Might says, "All right, use the remote operated hose on that truck and use the foam to put out the fire." and the Stamford Fire Department operatives would get it done. In just 7 short minutes, although those minutes still felt like an eternity to everyone in the tower, the North Tower of the World Trade Center was saved by 9:34 a.m. Smoke still billowed from the tower, so people were keeping an eye on it. However, thermal cameras had determined that there was no significant fire still within the tower. And if there was anything, it was weak enough that it could be put off for a short amount of time. As such, All Might would then take ladder 118 and would take them right across to the South Tower. It was 9:36 a.m. when ladder 118 would be set down as close to as in a prime spot for handling cleanup of the South Tower. But obviously, while in the towers, All Might did have to move the truck around a bit carefully, as there was a giant steel core blocking some areas that were on fire from being put out. But so this would happen for both the North Tower and the South Tower. But at 9:36 a.m., the beginning of the spraying of the fire hose would begin. And however, due to the way that the South Tower was hit, there was part of the outer frame of the building that was also hit and damaged and compromised. So, this tower was much more difficult to put out fire in without disrupting the tower and causing it to collapse. And it was also much weaker than the North Tower was. The World Trade Center everyone was looking up and just thinking, it's going to be okay. All Might's here. As that was All Might's goal. Regardless of what happened, he wanted to make sure everything was okay, and he wanted to convey that to the civilians, and he did. All Might would continue to help out ladder 118, and the South Tower would be labeled clear of any actual fire as of 9:49 a.m. Now, All Might was still stuck in the South Tower when word on the ground would be that the Pentagon in New Jersey, remember My Hero America AU, was also hit. The Pentagon being built just outside of Fort Lee, New Jersey, was also hit. And this was even scarier because that was a military target. So, All Might, though, was not able to assist. However, and we're going to be much more brief about the Pentagon, since we're mainly talking about the World Trade Center here, but it's meant to be a 9/11 sort of thing here, so yeah, we'll still talk about it. However, the future number 2 hero, Endeavor, would be on the scene. Now, Endeavor's fire quirk was definitely not conductive of this situation. It would not help for him to blast. What is he going to do? Blast the fire with more fire? However, Enji Todoroki was smart. Enji knew that he couldn't just blast fire at the fire to win, obviously. So what he would do is he would assist with keeping the structure as sound as it could be, and getting any civilians that survived the impact out. He would do this by using fire near his feet at very low temperatures but at very high thrust to propel him upward, allowing him to fly to the 6th floor, the top floor of the Pentagon, to get people out of it successfully. As such, the Pentagon was handled, because the number 2 hero Endeavor and rookie hero Best Jeanist were on the scene, both of which would do a very fine job of doing their best, I guess, to help the Pentagon. But back at the World Trade Center, All Might was just about to take ladder 118 out of the South Tower when the tower shook. The reason being simple. All Might had been a little too slow. The South Tower was damaged to the point that it would collapse at a matter of time. So All Might was thinking, and thinking quick. He took ladder 118 out and placed it in the middle of the plaza. He would then go back into the South Tower and hold it up rigorously. But before he went up, he quickly told the Stamford, Connecticut fire operatives, "Go get Cementos. He can help us out here. We need to get the tower back to being stable." Stamford, Connecticut fire operatives would go and see if they could find Cementos. Cementos was on evacuation duty. As Cementos, yes, he could technically use his concrete to fix the towers with that anyway, but it would require some significant risk to his well-being, as if the fires weren't put out, they could be an issue for him. So he waited and evacuated civilians in the meantime. However, he was unaware at that very moment that the tower's fires had been put out. So he had to go be found and told to do what to do. So Stamford, Connecticut operatives would find Cementos at 9:55 a.m. And Cementos would quickly make his way to the tower. But with All Might, the tower was shaking and starting to fall. At 9:53 a.m., the tower, it looked like it was it, because the tower's top section was now falling sideways instead of straight upward, meaning All Might couldn't just push up anymore to hold it. However, in an astonishing move, Inko would see this and notice this and realize that All Might was still in there. So what she would do is she would quickly run to use a med kit to get a quirk enhancer shot, a legal version of the future illegal drugs that would be used by the Shihei Seikai, but a legal version of it, a quirk enhancement, as well as an adrenaline shot. And then she also put a morphine shot in her belt. Now the reason for this was simple. She was going to help Toshi hold that tower. How would she do this? Well, for those who don't know, Inko's quirk is she can pull things towards her hands from a distance. So using a quirk enhancer needle, she would then reach up for the top of the tower and pull it the opposite way of where it was falling sideways, allowing All Might to continue doing what he was doing, pushing straight up, preventing the tower from falling. Inko would accomplish this at 9:54, and at 9:59, in our world, was the time the South Tower collapsed. Cementos would get up there and would use his quirk and put a giant concrete pillar through the middle of the South Tower, preventing it from falling. There would still be some debris falling, but the tower would stay standing. There would be no colossal wave of debris and cancerous smoke hitting the ground. Then All Might would quickly jump over to the North Tower, and at 10:02 a.m. would have the North Tower saved. All Might would then jump down and would land in the plaza, where he was informed of the Pentagon being hit. He was about to rush over when he got word from a police detective that there was more to be done. There was still 3 planes in the air. Now, at this point, it was obvious that all the planes in the United States airspace had been grounded due to these attacks. So he All Might immediately knew what that meant. There were still 3 planes heading for something. What? They have no idea. So All Might was processing what to do when he decided to think what would be a valuable target for the terrorists. Because at this point it was obvious this was a terrorist attack as well. So he thought, what are iconic things in the United States that would reasonably be targeted? And then he sat there and he thought, well, he can think of 3 right off the bat. 3 things that if destroyed, would decimate their cities, or country in one case. The Capitol building and or White House, which were just a few 100 meters from each other, so All Might would just have to go stand in between the two, but still. The Empire State Building would also be seen as a valuable target for the terrorists. And then the Sears Tower in Chicago. So he thought about this, and he was like, these things are the only things that make sense. Destroying these would cripple the economy in the United States. And then the government, in the case of the Capitol. So All Might immediately started ordering people to go to places. He took head of operation for this. All right, I need half of the police department to go watch the Capitol building and evacuate it immediately. Evacuate the White House as well. Then I also need the rest of the police department and fire department to come with me to the Empire State Building. And then he took off in the direction of the Empire State Building. All Might would watch in front of him. At this point, it was 10:08 a.m. And he would look forward and see, stunned, as he sees one of the planes heading right for the Empire State Building. He had 3 seconds to get in between that building, in between the building and the plane. And All Might, being All Might, did that. So All Might would literally stand sideways on the walls of the Empire State Building, using his quirk to exert more force on the plane than the plane would on him in the building. He grunted in pain as the plane slammed into him, pushing him slightly into the Empire State Building. All Might was angered now. Now that he could see the attackers face to face, he was angry. Angry in a way he had only felt once before. So, despite the fact that it was unlikely that the terrorists would be able to hear him over the loud jet engine, he said, just in pure anger and rage, "You dare attack my country, my home. You dare attack the innocent people that come from my country. You will pay for attacking the mighty Uncle Sam." All Might would almost growl at the pilots to this plane, furious that anyone would dare willingly do this. It was painful for him to look at. These monsters hidden behind a glass pane. However, he had to hold back, because he knew there were still passengers in that plane. The terrorists were stuttered in confusion, unsure of what to do. They were completely baffled. But All Might would simply just send another hero in to evacuate the civilians. Now, All Might would be forced to hold this plane there for a grueling 10 minutes until the rest of the police department was able to make their way to Midtown. And then All Might would reluctantly send in Inko. Despite not being a hero, she was the only one available, as the other heroes were helping at the Trade Center, the Capitol, the Pentagon. Now, Inko had gone in. She had been taught how to fight by her mother and All Might himself a little bit, so she could hold her own. So she went into the cabin doors and was immediately had a gun pointed at her. Now, knowing how to fight, she immediately slapped the gun away and immediately just sort of took it. She took the gun and shot the terrorists. And then also picked up a knife just in case she needed it. Now, Inko would then be forced to hold back a bit, as a terrorist would be holding a little girl on the plane hostage. Inko was pissed off, so she let the terrorist have it. She cussed him out, she insulted them, and she was like, "You fuckers, why did you do this? You monsters. The terrorists would attempt to explain their reasoning for attacking America and the world, for what they've done, for what has happened. But Inko would just sit there and just would immediately send out her rebuttal. But that's not our fault. Yeah, America's not perfect. It's done some horrendous things and it's done some horrendous things to your people. But that's not America's people, you idiot. We have nothing to do with these policies that have hurt your countries as you see it. We are innocent people who haven't done anything directly to hurt you. Our government did. And that pisses us off almost as much as it pisses you off. But doing this just makes it worse for your people. Because it makes us go in and meddle more. This was a quote reported by a passenger on the plane who had seen Inko fight. As Inko spoke, she inched closer and closer to the terrorist, who was too distracted considering Inko's rebuttal, to realize that Inko would then punch the terrorist in the face, catch the little girl, and in the same move, slice the terrorist's chest. The terrorist was now injured severely, but Inko was pissed off enough that she didn't hold back. She would stab the terrorist fatally later, just a few seconds later. Then Inko would evacuate the passengers, bring them to safety on the ground using her quirk as well as the help from a few other heroes, including Gran Torino. And then All Might would finally get to let loose.
Let me teach you a lesson. There is a motto that I was taught in high school that sure applies to my high school, but I feel as the symbol of this country applies to all citizens of this country. Go beyond. Plus ultra.
All Might would say this with malice. He wasn't happy that he had to say it under these circumstances. He was upset. But he would then punch that plane and send it flying. It would intentionally direct it to crash in the river, it would kill the terrorists. But astonishingly, the plane wasn't in that bad of a condition. All Might would then calm down and immediately head to rendezvous with the people at the Capitol. All Might would then ask,
"Any updates?"
And the police would give them a chilling report, but a report that All Might was slightly proud of. Not because the terrorists had done something, but because the American people had done something. The two other planes had went down at 10:02 and 10:17, respectively. The first plane went down in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, not far from Pittsburgh, and was crashed because the American people knew their fate and were going to go down swinging by crashing the plane themselves after overtaking the cockpit owned by the terrorists. The plane that All Might was right in guessing was heading for the Sears Tower, most likely, would crash just north of Rockford, Illinois, which is roughly 35 miles west of Chicago. All Might would kneel as a way of mourning and would say,
"Such brave heroes, putting their life on the line for their country and then losing it, but achieving their goal."
But now they knew for sure the coast was mostly clear. All the planes in the sky were now either grounded or had already crashed. This day will live in infamy forever. And All Might knew that. September 12th was a somber morning, despite the beautiful weather that would arrive on that day. It was a very somber morning. All Might had gone to the site for cleanup and spent multiple days there. Over the course of 13 months, the World Trade Center site would be cleaned up, including Building 7, which had gone down when a jet engine from Tower 2 had careened into the building, starting a fire that went unnoticed until it was already too late. But the Twin Towers still stood, despite that. However, they were critically damaged, to the point that they had to be taken down either way. And they would be taken down, piece by piece, over the course of 3 years. In early 2004, the last piece of the World Trade Center would be taken away. And then construction would be prepared again. Now, World Trade Centers 4 through 6 being the 3 smallest buildings of the World Trade Center, the black buildings at the base of the Twin Towers in many photos, would not sustain any significant damage and would not need to be replaced, although they still would be refinished. However, the owner of the Trade Center complex at the time, Larry Silverstein, would bring forward an idea proposed by several architects to take down the rest of the World Trade Center site as well, replace it with a memorial, and would take down the Twin Towers forever. Now this plan was liked by quite a few people. However, all those people were people who were involved in the plan in some way anyway. The common people of New York were furious. How dare you? How dare you let those bastards win? Because what this had done was it made Al-Qaeda win. At this point, Al-Qaeda was known to have been behind the attacks. Al-Qaeda had won because they wanted the towers gone, and they got that. So, New York was furious. America was furious. They should rebuild the Twin Towers. What are you idiots doing? Well, All Might agreed with them. All Might, who had become the symbol of peace and number one hero just after the 9/11 attacks, not long after. He used his influence. The only time he would use his influence to really do anything that wasn't hero related, I guess. All Might would stand with the people. In a stunning move that was recorded in late 2003, as the proposal for the new towers was being protested against, Larry Silverstein had called for protesters to be taken off of his property, as technically the Trade Center property was his. But All Might was called onto the scene because everyone else was busy and he was available and he was just trying to see what was going on. So All Might was like, all right, I'll go handle this. He goes over, thinking, by the way Larry was acting, thinking it was turning violent. But it wasn't. They were loud and they were angry, but they were staying peaceful. And All Might would look and go, so what is going on? And this is where he would find out about the proposal. And he would look at it. He'd be like, He liked the look of the new buildings. But unlike the billion-dollar executives that are head of the World Trade Center right now, he also was like, as cool as this looks, this isn't right. This is giving the win to Al-Qaeda. He agreed with the common people. He agreed with the dozens of New Yorkers that were in front of him, and he agreed with the 7 million or so New Yorkers that were for the Twin Towers. So All Might, in a stunning move, would fold the paper up put it in his belt, would walk towards the front of the crowd, do a 180, and would shout,
"Bring back the Twin Towers."
And with that, history's fate was sealed. In November of 2003, Larry Silverstein would make a phone call. And in would walk Richmond Yaoyorozu. And yes, for those wondering, that is the father of Momo Yaoyorozu. However, Momo was not born yet. Richmond Yaoyorozu was confused as to why he was called in. He was like, why would the owner of the World Trade Center want me here? He's already got his own plan. Richmond was an architect, a famous architect, and billionaire owner of an architecture firm. Richmond was the owner of Yaoyorozu and Partners architecture firm. An architecture firm, obviously, for mainly New York and Chicago. His architecture firm would design the Sears Tower, actually. Well, they would assist. There was another architecture firm involved, but the Sears Tower was partly designed by Richmond himself. And as such, Richmond was filthy rich, having a net worth of nearly $75 billion and being in the top 5 richest people on Earth. Now, Richmond was confused as to why he was called in, though, because why? Why would Larry want me to do anything? He's got his proposal set up. He's already submitted it, and it was approved by the city. Like, why does he want me here? So Richmond would walk in and would be prepared for anything, and he still wasn't prepared for what would happen in that room. Larry Silverstein would sit down and would basically explain that he can't own the Trade Center anymore. He's only owned the Trade Center for 3 years, but he can't do what the people are asking of him. He sits there and he just goes, I want to sell the World Trade Center to you because I can't afford to do what these people want. I can't throw up two $3 billion towers. I can't afford that. But you can, he says. So Richmond is sitting there astonished. He sits there and he's like, wow, this is a huge opportunity. But he's going to want a lot of money for it, isn't it? So he asks, how much for the towers? And Larry then replies, I just want $2-3 billion so I can go own something else and maybe get something else working. And Richmond says, done deal, and shakes Larry Silverstein's hand. Richmond Yaoyorozu was now the owner of the World Trade Center. And 2 months later, the Yaoyorozu proposal for the World Trade Center would be announced. And this is March of 2004. The proposal was extremely, radical. It was something that no one would ever thought could be possible. But Yaoyorozu was a man who was passionate about the United States and passionate about architecture. Yaoyorozu would sit there and he would think. Richmond would properly go through his proposal, and in just 2 months' time, he got exactly what he wanted. The proposal was simple. He would buy out the land. He would buy out land across the street and buy that entire block, which was fairly underdeveloped, with only a few moderately sized buildings there, but the buildings were old. He had bought this block of land for another $4 billion. And he was like, so, let's ball out, was basically his idea. Let's show Al-Qaeda that they ain't shit. That was his idea. So Richmond, this young billionaire, would sit there and he would just quickly draw some quick sketches on his desk, would send it to a graphics artist, and then a render would be made up. And in March of 2004, that render would be revealed to the public. Richmond had proposed to mix Silverstein's plans with the Twin Towers plan. And he double-checked with Silverstein before he went ahead, and Silverstein was like, do whatever you want. Richmond would rebuild the Twin Towers in their exact spot. Down to the goddamn millimeter, as he put it in his article. He would keep the small buildings around the World Trade Center, but then would also build all of Silverstein's towers around it using vacant space that was just near the World Trade Center, including the so-called Freedom Tower, Mirror Tower, Economy Tower, Shield Tower, Bankers Trust Tower, Nature Tower, and Unity Tower. It's a lot of names, but you'll see what they are in the visuals for this video. So Richmond proposed this idea, and the people loved it. They absolutely adored this idea. But Richmond would then make a small tweak to the design in early 2005, just 3 weeks before construction. Richmond went fucking nuts and decided to give Al-Qaeda the biggest fuck you possible, and literally put in the plans, make the Twin Towers as tall as possible. And he said, I don't care how much of my money I have to sink into it. This was a game changer. People were astonished, but patriotic. People were reported there was a grand announcement for this proposal, and this update to the proposal in Times Square. It was all over the news because it was astonishing. Like, this is insane. And there were reports of during the news report and after the news report of people chanting in Times Square, "Yeah, fuck Al Qaeda, yeah, yeah," cheering out loud and just shouting in public. The people were proud, and the people were happy. Richmond Yayarozu would get Times Man of the Year award that year for this, and he would also become America's favorite billionaire. Now Richmond would then get his proposal approved. It would be approved because of a patriotic new city government that had stepped in after the previous government that sided with Silverstein a couple years earlier. And construction would begin on February 8th of 2005. The World Trade Center was back, and it was coming back quick. So Richmond Yayarozu would then build the tallest building possible, and to this day is likely seen as the tallest structure on Earth possible. Each twin tower ended up being $15 billion in construction costs. And each tower, to the roof height alone, would be over 1.5 miles tall. The world was astonished. Even Dubai, which was trying to enter the skyscraper race, was like, well, we're fucked. Although their tower, the Burj Khalifa, would be the tallest in the world for a couple months, while the Twin Towers were catching up in construction. And on September 8th, 2012, two World Trade Center and one World Trade Center, being the Twin Towers, would open after being completed early in 2012. But then the towers went through their first big test, as in October of 2012, Hurricane Sandy hit, devastating New York City, especially Manhattan, with flooding and high winds. People were worried that the towers were so tall that they would be blown over. But Richmond was the architect of the United States, and he was prepared for this. He knew high winds would be an issue. So he made an astonishing move that would be similar to a future tower known as 432 Park Avenue. If you look at the Twin Towers, you will see these dark gray patches every so often. Now, in the actual Twin Towers, those were service floors with air conditioning and maintenance systems and such. But in Richmond's Twin Towers, these were ventilation floors. These ventilation floors allowed wind to pass through without pushing on the tower. And these ventilation floors were every 15 floors of the tower's 310 floors. So these were often, and they would appear a lot. And they were enough for the Twin Towers to stay standing. And hell, there were much smaller buildings hit worse by Hurricane Sandy than the Twin Towers were. So Yair Ozu's plan worked. Now, the base of the towers had to be widened for this proposal. Instead of 210 by 210 feet as the towers were, Richmond had to up the width of the base to 400 by 400 feet, meaning that the towers had enough office space to encompass the rest of New York altogether. There was now enough concrete in each tower to support it, to pave a path around the edge of the United States and complete the loop with enough concrete left over to build a small skyscraper. These new towers made the other ones look puny. 300 stories. A gargantuan 7,117 foot tall South Tower. 7,132 foot tall North Tower. And that is to the roof. That is not including the spire or observation deck. The spire would add another 1,000-ish feet, making the total height of the North Tower 8,300 feet. Over 1.5 miles tall. The World Trade Center would then slowly complete the rest of the buildings, with Freedom Tower topping out to its roof, 6,300 feet, with the spire taking it up to 7,100 feet, just below the roofs of the Twin Towers, with the Mirror Tower having a height of 6,300 feet as well, with the Unity Tower, which is still under construction to this day because of some delays and stuff like that. The tower is set to be 6,025 feet tall, meaning it will also become one of the tallest in the world. And that was Richmond's plan. He wanted to make all the World Trade Center buildings insurmountable in height. The Burj Khalifa in Dubai, topping out at 3,500 feet, is shorter than every building except for 3 at the World Trade Center, according to Richmond's proposal. The next tallest tower would be the Nature Tower, known for its stunning natural gardens and beauty. Would be designed by BIG, another architecture firm that has worked with Yair Ozu and partners in the past. And and would be built to be 6,100 feet tall, actually slightly eclipsing the Unity Tower in height, although only slightly. Um, this would then be followed by the Economy Tower, which would be just over 5,000 feet tall, and then followed by the Shield Tower, which would be just under 4,500 feet tall. Then the Bankers Trust building, which was actually a late-term addition to the World Trade Center site after a construction issue occurred in which some pieces of the South Tower had fallen and had done heavy damage to the Deutsche Bank building, which was also known as the Bankers Trust building for a time. The building would be forced to be demolished after the damage it took, and as such, the Bankers Trust building for the World Trade Center is a skyscraper that is just over 4,000 feet tall and is a mixed-use tower. Then World Trade Center 7, which is a little over 3,000 feet tall, is the shortest skyscraper of the World Trade Center. I know that's ironic to say because it's over 3,000 feet tall, but it's still the smallest skyscraper within the World Trade Center complex. However, you do still have the hotel at the base of the Twin Towers, which is 425 feet tall, meaning it is not quite skyscraper height. For those who don't know, 150 meters or 492 feet is what constitutes a skyscraper. And the hotel doesn't quite count as that. However, it is the tallest non-skyscraper in the Trade Center complex at 425 feet tall. Then you have the other three smaller buildings, known as the mall buildings, locally nicknamed that as of recently, as there are many shops in these smaller buildings, and they all connect to the huge mall that is underneath the World Trade Center and Twin Towers. The World Trade Center would also build a transportation hub right next to the Economy Tower. It looks really nice. The Oculus is what it's called, and it is a very pretty building, and I feel like it fits the Trade Center complex a lot. Then across the street, the block that Richmond had bought, the entire block of land. This land was then turned into the 9/11 memorial pool idea brought up by Larry Silverstein. There is a building there, a small building, for the 9/11 museum that holds artifacts and pieces of the attacks, things of interest, etc. And it is a very peaceful and calm place. The names of the people who could not be saved, all 585 lives, are etched into the stone on the sides of these memorial pools. So it is a very pretty place. The memorial pools are very calming, and it's a very somber place, though. It definitely isn't the most enjoyable place to be. However, it still thrives. The trees that are grown at the park are very bright and vibrant and are lively, and life has found itself once more, despite the tragedy. Now, after their completion and opening in 2012, and later the completion of the other buildings from 2013 to 2023, and there are still a few more being built, the World Trade Center has thrived. The World Trade Center is set to be complete entirely by 2025, which is, we are almost there, so it's already almost done. And there are over 15 buildings on the site, compared to the 7 that there used to be. The World Trade Center is meant to be a beacon of hope for democracy, for the future, and that is what it has always been. It is protected under federal law. You can't, there is a literal law. It was called the Twin Towers Act of 2009 that literally was passed by Congress in a nigh unanimous vote, which is extremely rare nowadays for obvious reasons. But a near unanimous vote to make it so that it is illegal to have the World Trade Center complex removed or changed. And Congress agreed. And as of ever since November 3rd, 2009, it has been illegal to demolish the Twin Towers. The World Trade Center stands today still the tallest building in the world. Not many buildings have come anywhere close. However, there have been a few lucky buildings that have actually gotten somewhat close to the height of the World Trade Center buildings due to advancements in technology, making it slightly cheaper, and also just people getting richer. There are a few buildings that have approached the height of the World Trade Center buildings. First off, there is the Central Park Tower, also known as the Nordstrom Tower in northern Manhattan. It is a 6,250 foot tall tower. It is the tallest in terms of roof height that isn't a World Trade Center building. It is also the tallest residential building in the world. It's astonishing. Then there's also the Steinway Tower, also in northern Manhattan, completed in 2020. A little smaller, but it's pretty nice at a little under 6,000 feet. You then have the Hudson Spire, which is a massive tower and is the only tower in the world outside of the Trade Center complex to surpass the Freedom Tower's roof height, with the spire on top of its roof reaching a height of 6,500 feet, meaning its roof height is about 200 feet taller than that of the Freedom Tower's roof height. Although it's the Hudson Spire's spire that gives it this height, not the roof. So technically, Freedom Tower is still ahead. Then we also have 175 Park Avenue, the newest building here, completed in 2021, being at a height of 6,200 feet, less than 50 feet shorter, and is the second tallest residential building in the world. The world is growing taller, but that doesn't change where the World Trade Center stands. Not one bit. As the World Trade Center will forever be a beacon of hope, freedom, democracy, and finance across the world. It is unanimously recognized as the financial capital of the world to this day, even beating the stock exchange. So when you look at New York watching My Hero America and see the gargantuan Twin Towers standing above New York, know that it took a lot of work to get there. But as long as they're still standing, so shall America. Thanks for watching. Hey guys, I'm recording the outro. It's been a month. I'm recording this after I finished editing the video. It's been a whole month. I didn't think this video would take this long, but I got caught up in some shit. Also working on My Hero America. Yes, it's coming, I promise. So yeah, but I just wanted to make a little outro to say, if you want me to do more videos like this, covering the history of the My Hero America universe, then I'll happily do that. I'm a history nerd. I love alternate history. I watch shows like Real Life Lore and Alternate History Hub all the time, so I am more than willing to go into depth about how the history of this world came to be. But in other news, just we're looking for animators or artists in general. I know that sounds weird to put at the end of this video, but if you happen to work in Blender or can replicate the 2D My Hero Academia art style and can at least work to make like an animatic, or even if you can just draw for us, then please contact me in the comments, or contact me in the comments and then show me some proof of this information, and you will officially be helping us with My Hero America, because we've got we got two people who are testing the waters, seeing if they want to join the animator group right now. But if you work in Blender, or you can draw in the My Hero art style, please contact us. We could really use the help, and we want to get My Hero America done. I'll be making a separate video explaining this part, but yeah, would be much appreciated. And this is Izuku Midoyagi signing off.